My name is Maria Juarez, and you're listening to In This Casa. Bienvenidos. In this podcast, I aim to memorialize and honor my husband David's memory by exploring conversations about life and what it's like in my casa, and hopefully in other casas as well. Welcome back to In This Casa, and thank you for joining me. In this episode, I'd like to talk about the grief that some people feel when they're anticipating the loss of a loved one. Whether it's because of a terminal illness or somebody who's just aged through their journey in life, I think that there is a significant conversation that's not had in regards to the way that people grieve and interact and what their relationships look like with their loved one who's going to no longer be earthside soon, and they're aware of it. And I think that there can be a little bit of shame associated with the way that some people react and how they handle their grief in this particular situation. And I want to talk about it because I don't think that it should be a shameful situation. Before I get deeper into it, I want to mention that this is just my opinion, so you don't have to agree with me. But I've just been thinking about it recently because most of the people prior to David that I've lost in my life were older family members who maybe had illnesses that were caused by age, and then they eventually passed. Honestly, the majority of them were stroke victims. And then, currently I'm experiencing the journey of losing a loved one who's personally very close to me, and she's dying of a terminal illness. And, I have family members who have lost friends of terminal illnesses at a young age, and other people who were very close to them or, meant a lot to them and to their lives. And everybody seems to react to it differently. And, I've noticed that there's conversation about what's the right thing to do in regards to interacting with your loved one that you're going to lose soon. I think what I'm trying to specifically talk about is I'm not a person who is going through the journey of the end of my life with a terminal illness. And so I don't know what that feels like. And I would imagine that I want to spend as much time as I can with every single one of my family members. And I would imagine that I would be communicating that to them. And I think what I want to focus on here is the family members who are losing the loved one and how they interact with that person, and then how everybody around and in the same family situation, in the same family unit, family dynamic, is perceiving each other's version of grieving the situation. So what I mean is that, if I was at the end of my journey with a terminal illness, and I've asked my family members to spend as much time with me as possible, I would guess that there would be family members of mine who would be spending a lot of time with me. That part of their grief journey and what they need for their soul and their spirit is to spend time with me. And so that's what they prioritize. And then I would imagine that there's also family members who are not spending as much time with me. And I think I want to talk about that because I feel like that has a very negative connotation in situations like this. And I don't know that it should, because I think on surface level, it does seem very dismissive or maybe hurtful, that I have a family member that knows that I'm going to leave this world soon, and it feels like they're not prioritizing spending time with me. And maybe I have other family members who are watching this happen, and they also think the same thing, like that doesn't seem right, that time's not being prioritized. But I have watched family members in the past in these kinds of situations keep their distance from their loved one during the dying process, and then grieve the guilt of not being there after the fact. And I don't know if that guilt is really their own guilt, or if it's guilt imposed on them because people seem to say things like, you should have been there. You should have gone to see them. You should have spent time with them. You should have, you know? And I don't know if that's fair for us to do to each other, because everybody's grief process is different and everybody's emotions are different, and your emotional capacity and what your spirit can handle and still be able to maintain your responsibilities daily in a healthy way is different from everybody else. And I'm not sure that we should not consider that about people. I think that, you know, maybe it's okay. And maybe it's okay, and it needs to be destigmatized, and it needs to be something that we recognize as a possible part of the grief process, but when you're in the process of losing somebody. So that way, everybody's individual feelings can be supported. And what I mean by that, okay, so how I'm going to try to explain it is through the practice of the 3Cs through the grief process. And I don't know who created the concept of the 3Cs, but I found the concept on ketteringhealth.org. And the 3Cs to consider during the grief process is choose, connect, and communicate. And the first one, choose. The description says, choose what's best for you. Even during dark bouts of grief, you still possess the dignity of choice. Grief often brings the sense of loss of control. Make choices about what you can attend, join, and do, and what you can't, to help reinstate some of that loss of control. And so I think that's the first thing that I'm trying to defend here is the individual griever's choice of how they process and interact with their loved one. I think that some people can't face the idea that they're about to lose somebody. Maybe some people can't face the difference in their loved one, and their heart's broken by seeing that change in them and knowing they're going to lose them. Maybe they just don't have the emotional capacity to do that. And I think it should be okay for them to decide that. I think it should be okay for them to decide that they have to salvage their own spirit in the process of losing somebody that's extremely important to them. The second one is connect. It says we're wired for connection, and grief intensifies feelings of loneliness, which often leads to isolation. It's difficult but important not to remove yourself from others' lives. No one wants to constantly hear, "How are you doing?" But it's important not to fake it when you're asked. That honesty will help you and will help others help you. And so I feel like that description sounds a little bit more about grieving after the fact. But the way that in my head I relate it to what we're talking about, which is grieving a loved one before you actually lose them, is knowing that we are wired for connection, but it's important not to fake it when you're asked. You don't want to isolate, but I don't think you should force yourself either. I think that you should understand what kind of connections you're capable of handling emotionally in the grief journey that you're on. And then I think you should be honest about that with others. And that will help you to not have disagreements within your family during a very sensitive time about how each other are handling the grief process. I think if you can, honestly verbalize to them or to your family members or to the loved one that you're losing that the in-person connection, the physical connection at the time is too intense for you to be able to handle, it's okay. I think that that's an okay feeling. Which I think that takes us to the third C, which is communicate, which says, put your needs out there, say to others, this is going to be awkward or weird, but this is what I need. Let folks know how you plan to respond to others who ask, how are you doing? The greatest difficulty of this, though, is the vulnerability it requires. Communicating however you can to your friends and family will help them know how best to come alongside you, especially when grief arrives. And in those moments of breakdown or confusion, talk about it. It's how we heal. So I think that is what ties into connecting, right? If you can't connect, if it's overwhelming and it's too much for you, I think that just needs to be communicated to your loved one that you're losing so that they understand any distance that you may have with them during this part of their journey, so that they can hopefully reconcile that within their own emotions, know that you love them, know that you mean a lot to them, but that you just emotionally don't have the capacity or strength to be physically present during that process, which is okay. but I think it needs to be communicated. And additionally, I mean, I guess it wouldn't need to be communicated to anybody else, their friends or family in the situation, because the most important relationship here is the relationship between you and your loved one who is passing. But it would be helpful to also communicate that to your other loved ones, family members, friends that are in the same process of loss of this shared loved one, because then they can understand, I know that you can do it. I know that you can be there. I know that you can handle it emotionally, but I can't. And that's okay that you can do it. It's okay that I can't. And maybe that person has the capacity to, pick up the slack a little bit, because you don't have the ability to do that. And there's nothing wrong. There's nothing bad. There shouldn't be any judgment in somebody who can't do it. And there's not, any additional kudos or praises for the family member who can. It's just giving everybody the opportunity to do what's best for their own peace in the love and relationship of losing that one person. And it doesn't matter how it's done. There's no right way to do it. But I think that where we fall short as humans in our society is that we do think, oh, well, that's not right. You should be there, they should be helping, or this should be happening. And, we can't control what other people do, and we'll never be able to, because not everybody thinks the same. And I think we just need to remember that not everybody thinks the same. And that's okay. It's okay to not have the same reaction. What's important is that we understand that it's okay for us to not have the same reaction, and for us to have compassion for the other people involved in our journey, and for the way that they need to handle things versus the way that we're able to. Grief hurts, and grief is difficult. But a person navigating loss is on a journey to healing, or has already started a journey to healing that they are even aware that they've already begun. And it's not easy. And no matter how they choose to go about that process, everyone is feeling it differently and having their own experience with it. And so how any one person's choice of handling grief should not be viewed as a burden to anybody else. We're all just navigating loss, and there's no instruction manual for how to do that. And it doesn't even look the same for each individual person, for every single person they lose. There's so many variables that impact what that navigation looks like, and it's different. It was different for me when I lost my maternal grandmother than it was when I lost my paternal grandfather, and when I lost one of my uncles on my dad's side, and when I lost a best friend, and when I lost my husband. But I think the most important thing is just to remember that we're not all the same. We're not all going to think the same. We're not all going to react the same. And if we're reacting different or choosing different paths during our grief journey, that's okay. As long as you're not hurting yourself or hurting others, that's okay. And we can let people choose their paths without having an opinion about it. And we can just continue with our own and what that looks like with ourselves and our loved one that we're losing. I think maybe I'm just at a point in my grief process where I might be a little bit stronger. Not strong by any means, but strong enough to be able to just look outside my own grief for a little bit, which was very, very difficult for the past 15 months. And be a little bit more aware of other grief journeys that are present in the lives around me. And I think I'm just able to look at how I have felt in regards to my grief journey, and how I think that maybe relating the impact my grief journey has had on me to what other people were feeling in different circumstances, and understanding that we all just really need to have a little bit of understanding and grace for each other in the situation. I hope that this conversation in this episode was helpful. And if it wasn't, maybe it got you to thinking about, this particular part of a person's grief journey, if you've experienced it or not, or if someone around you has experienced it. And maybe it's given a different perspective. And if it has, leave me a comment. I'd like to see if there's a different perspective than what I have in regards to this particular process of the journey of loss and grief. But either way, you can join me here next Saturday, and we can continue to talk about what it's like in my casa. And if you'd like to talk about what it's like in your casa with me, send me an email. I'll talk to you soon.